The whole mishpacha is there, Epis. This is nice. So listen, I don't want anybody to go home and say the rabbi didn't come to shul with a coat and tie. You see the tie? You see the coat? That's all you're going to see. I recommend if you're wearing a coat, take it off. It's too damn hot. We'll be Israeli today. You can take off ties too if you like. Hell, you can take off pants, but that would be a little risque. Yes.
Where's the Caribbean hat?
It's in the office. It's up in there. Welcome, seriously, gentlemen, ladies. If you're wearing something, take it off. It's really hot. Take it all off. Why not? Today you're going to be glad that your rabbi is an expert in air conditioning. Say the bracha. Because it's miserable. It's miserable. It's mamish crazy outside. It was 117 in Van Nuys yesterday. That's nuts. That's in celebration of Scott Pruitt's resignation. There's no global warming. It's 119 in LA. It's 103 in New York. It's 100 in Chicago. It couldn't be. It's not man-made, that's for sure. It's God. God's angry. I think hell is getting closer, don't you think? I think we're just like either descending or hell is rising, one or the other. Anyway, good morning. Hope everybody's well.
Let's keep the cold air in.
Yeah, we're going to close the door in a minute. Just as soon as we'll go at 9 o'clock, so people can find us. Otherwise, it's a little hard to find us. That's why. So the new Schulweiss Chapel and Weiner Prayer Space will have better signage. And it can be yours if the price is right. It can be the Halpern Chapel, for all I care. For a few $1 million, you can have your name on the wall. I hope everybody's okay. Happy New Year. Happy 4th of July. Everybody's doing okay. Independence Day this week. Good. And now we are into the dog days of July. Good. Okay, good morning. We'll take another minute, then we'll start, because we never start on time, so I don't want this to be, I don't want to, because I wanted to get out of the house a little bit, because I thought maybe a little less hot, if I left in my usual time. Nina came back from walking the dog, and she was like, so.
You have to be careful with the dog's paws. I heard that if you
Yeah.
put your paw down and it's too hot for you, it's too hot for you.
I walked out, yesterday when I walked out to the parking lot, because I finished my day in the middle of the afternoon, the heat coming off the parking lot was more than the heat coming from the sun. It was horrible. It was just horrible. Really hot.
Do you guys mind if we sit there?
Please, no, please. Gelman's in Aspen, so you can sit here. Oh, what we're going to say today. Hi, Mark.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, Mickey. It's a joy to see you. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
See, there are people coming. It's a good thing. Yeah. Good morning.
My birthday's this coming Friday.
Happy birthday, Rick. Happy birthday. A good birthday to you.
The last one.
The lunch and learn's over for the summer. Torah study? 2 weeks. We'll go this week, next week, and the week after. So it's the 22nd, what's it? I'm leaving on the 24th, so the 21st, yeah?
Where are you going?
So Saturday night is, in 2 weeks we have Tisha B'Av. It's a hell of a synagogue calendar when the only thing you got to look forward to is Tisha B'Av, and it'll be a great Tisha B'Av. So we'll have Torah study next week, and next week we're also going to celebrate, besides a lovely young kid's bar mitzvah, Ian Budai's bar mitzvah, it's a third generation kid in the shul. We're going to celebrate Yossi Dresner's 80th birthday. So he said, no, nothing, I don't want nothing. So we invited the whole shul. So for those who'd like to do it, his birthday is actually Thursday. So Thursday morning at Minyan, we're going to make a big deal and have a breakfast afterwards. And then Shabbos morning next week, we'll celebrate Yossi's 80th birthday and have a lovely celebration. He's a wonderful character, part of our community. And then the week after that, we will celebrate, we'll have Shabbat, we'll have Torah study, and that evening is a Tisha B'Av. Okay, Tisha B'Av is that day where we sort of accumulate all of the catastrophes of the Jewish people onto one day. So we'll do a study session together, and then after that we'll read the book of Lamentation. We'll do this, folks from Adat Ariel and from Stephen Weiss are joining us that day. So we'll do a study, and then we'll do a little ritual and that's Saturday night. But that Shabbos morning in 2 weeks will be the last Torah study. So there'll be no Torah study the last week of July, the 28th, and then we'll take the month of August off. So you'll have to read on your own through the book of Deuteronomy, and we'll continue the first week in September, okay, which is Labor Day weekend. It's also Slichas. So thank you. It's wonderful.
If people want me to fill this up.
Can I get a margarita, a mimosa?
This is what I'm doing with my rabbinical school education.
No,
I'm
it's
serving water and margaritas, and
It's-
I brought it in here in case
Sherry
someone
is
gets out of breath.
Sherry is a very distinguished author and an ordained rabbi.
But actually, I'm a really good margarita maker.
And a cocktail waitress at heart. She's an old friend of mine. Wonderful. No, it's true. It's wonderful. Yeah, good. Anyway, good morning. I think now we'll close the door and we'll proceed. Everybody good? Please be careful in this heat. It's really awful. Okay. Okay. Please be careful with the heat, because seriously, this is like beyond. It's 81 in here, but it's like 103 outside, and it's only 9 o'clock in the morning, and it really worries me. You know, there's some members of the shul who are elderly and don't know how to use thermostats. So. Okay, good morning. Shabbat Shalom. We are close to the end of the book of Bamidbar. The Parsha is called Pinchas. It's on page 918 in the Chumash. Everybody got a Chumash? They brought some, so they're here in the room. Good morning, guys. Welcome. Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Why is this story in the Torah altogether? That's the harder question. Good morning. And to those watching on TV, good morning.
It's so hot, I'm worried people aren't even realizing they're dehydrated.
We have water.
Jewish mother.
Yeah. Thanks.
Anybody wants? Yes? Yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? Kitty sauce. Come in. Okay, once again, following our Torah study this morning, you're welcome to come daven. This morning is a very unusual Shabbat for Valley Beth Shalom. There's nothing happening except davening. There's no bar mitzvah, no ufruf, no birthday. I'm sure someone will show up with something, I'm sure. But if you want to just come and pray with us, it's a nice thing, and we'll finish a little early. Because Herschel's here, right. So we'll have a little Parsha discussion following that. Please be careful going home with the heat. It's really dreadful, okay? Be careful. Even just the walk from here to the car is kind of dreadful in this kind of heat. Yeah, if you need a shuttle, take the shuttle. The guys will drive you out to your car. Drink a lot of water, wear a hat, okay? Sit in the pool. Just be really, really careful, okay? Next week, Shabbos, we'll do Torah study as usual. And that, besides the wonderful bar mitzvah of Ian Budai, who's a third-generation member of the shul, we will also, I married his parents, so it's sweet for me. We'll also be celebrating Yossi Dresner's 80th birthday. Yossi is a wonderful character in our shul, a teacher and leader of prayer, reader of Torah, and just a character, and we'd love to celebrate his life and accomplishment. And then the following week, which is the 21st, we'll have Torah study in the morning, and then that evening, Saturday night, is Tisha B'Av. At Saturday night, we'll gather, I think it's around 7:30. We'll learn together for an hour or so, and then we'll do the traditional reading of the Eicha book and meditation on the destruction of the Jewish people. Okay, and that'll be that'll be the end of Torah study for the semester. We'll take the month of August off, and we'll be back the first week in September. Okay, everybody got that? Good. We're on page We're going to begin today on page 918. We're going to jump around a little bit. We're at the end of the book of Bamidbar. The book of Bamidbar, as you remember from our beginning of our conversation, is this tour through the wilderness of the human spirit. The name Bamidbar comes from the idea in the first line. It says it takes place in the wilderness of Sinai, but really it captures the book, because this is a reflection of the human wilderness. And every one of the urges, the impulses, the destruction, the self-destruction of a human community is manifest in this book. We have the power of fear, the power of jealousy, the power of rage, the power of betrayal. One after the other, it is a very bleak picture of the human material out of which Moses is trying to fashion the just society and the holy people. And it all falls on Moshe. It all falls on Moses, right? Everybody, every tie in his life gets betrayed. His family betrays him. His brother and sister will murmur, will talk against his wife. I mean, you think, every Jewish family, right? The sister-in-law, right? And then his tribe will betray him. The Levites will rise up, led by his first cousin Korach, will rise up against him. And the elders of the community will betray him. They'll betray him as they join Korach's rebellion, and they'll betray him when he sends 10, 12 spies into the land, and they discourage the people from entering the land. And the people betray him, because given the chance to achieve the dream, they turn the other way and want to go back to Egypt. And then, most egregiously, his God will betray him. That horrible moment that we saw a couple weeks ago. His sister has died, and she is really the female presence in his life, the maternal presence in his life. The sister dies, he's sitting Shiva, the people fetch, there's no water. God says, take the stick, go to the rock, but don't hit the stick, just talk to the rock. Moshe loses it, whacks the rock. God says, you don't go into the land. And you have a sense that by the end of the book, the poor man is just broken, because every tie that attaches him to his dream is gone. And there's a sort of tragedy to this. Tremendous tragedy. And now we get to the end of the book. And here at the end of the book, we have a series of little vignettes. There's no through line to this parsha. There's a series of vignettes. It's like the author finished the book and he said, I got this great stuff, I don't want to lose it. I'll throw it in the end of the book. And the series of vignettes are all these sort of snapshots of things that are going to happen, but they're also foreshadowing what's going to happen next. We're going to have the story of how Moshe asks for a successor. His life is coming to an end. He feels it. And he asks for a successor, and God gives him the instructions to appoint Joshua and to ordain Joshua as the leader of the people. He wants to enter the land. God gives him the instruction once again, you're not going to see the end of this journey. And then there's this other strange vignette, which is the vignette that the Torah portion is named after. And it has to do with the interaction between the Israelites and the peoples among whom they're going to live. In the desert, they lived among nobody. It's an empty land. It's an empty place. You don't have to worry about neighbors in the desert. But once you enter the land, you enter into a social interaction, into a cultural interaction. And the question is, how will Israel, as a people, as a culture, interact with the peoples of the land? This, by the way, is going to be a question for all of Jewish history. We are not the first generation of Jewish history to worry about assimilation. Assimilation, if you think about it, it's really what happens when a people wanders through history interacting with other peoples. And the question is, what is creative assimilation and when is assimilation a curse? We have always interacted with other peoples, and we have had a remarkable talent for being able to draw the best of those cultures into ours. In fact, you would have a very hard time isolating that which is ultimately Jewish from the interactions with other cultures. There's a great Bible scholar named Yechezkel Kaufman who made this case where that he tried to isolate in the Bible what was ours and what was the Canaanites. Because we drew from the Egyptians, we drew from the Babylonians, we drew from the Canaanites, we drew from the Greeks, we drew from the Romans, we drew from the Persians. Then we drew from medieval Europe and medieval Arabia. the Arab Muslim cultures of the Middle Ages. Then we drew from modernity, and now we draw from America. I mean, we're speaking English, folks. We are part of this culture, right? And we have taken from America cultural forms. Democracy. Democracy is not a Jewish idea. Good morning. You don't, I mean, this idea that a shul chooses a rabbi and votes, and then when they're tired of him, votes him out, that's democracy. That's an American ideal. That's not a Jewish thing. So you have other forms of Americanism that has come into our Judaism. We have always carried the cultures of other people. I mean, the great example, some of you are Eastern European Jews like me. So you know from gefilte fish. There's nothing Jewish about gefilte fish. We stole it from the Russians, The diet that all of us identify as Jewish, right? Rye bread, corned beef, kreplach, borscht, right? These are Russian, Polish, Eastern European foods that we koshered. Now, that's part of the process. What makes it assimilatable? What assimilation strengthens us and what assimilation weakens us? Part of it is it kosherable? Can you make it kosher? Okay? Can you make the foods, the language, the culture, the values, the art forms kosher? Okay? Sephardic Jews, Persian Jews, Mizrahi Jews eat other foods because they drew from their cultures. We speak our languages. We speak Yiddish. Yiddish is 80% German, 15% Hebrew, 5% everything else in the world. Chinese, Persians speak Judeo-Persian. Sephardim speak Ladino, right? There's a Judean Italian. Wherever we lived, we sort of messed with the language. We messed with the culture. We've adopted, assimilated, digested, brought it into us, and made it part of us. The question is, what is creative assimilation and what is destructive assimilation? When does assimilation become destructive? When have you tried to digest something which is poisonous? Right? So this becomes an interesting question. I mean, you can think of some examples of things that we refuse to assimilate. We refuse to assimilate the idea of that God had one son named Jesus. That was a very popular idea, God's giving birth to men. That was a very popular idea, but we refuse to assimilate that idea. There are other things we refuse to assimilate, right? And there are things that we assimilated that we now regret that we assimilated. I mean, it's just a very interesting story. It's a very sophisticated, very complicated story of a Jewish assimilation. And when assimilation is a blessing, the great historian Gerson Cohn wrote a famous essay called The Blessings of Assimilation. And when assimilation is a curse, when adopting cultural forms from the outside poisoned the Jewish heart. That's the question that we're going to be asked here, because we're going to come into contact with two local cultures. So you'll see that story. I see you, Mike. I'll be right there. I just want to turn the page first, right? If you'll take a quick look at the end of last week's Torah portion, so you'll understand the beginning of this one. Page 907, chapter 25 in the book of Numbers. Yes, Michael? No?
You use the word acculturation a lot.
Yeah.
S.I. Hayakawa, who's the great linguist, said
Yes.
the problem with using that word is it's used interchangeably. It should be, there are two things. There's assimilation and there's acculturation.
Right.
Assimilation is when you literally assimilate into another culture. Acculturation is when you take things from the culture.
Yeah, and the great essayist Achad Ha'am used similar words. He talked about imitation and assimilation.
And I think you need to sort of separate that.
The problem is that it's much more sophisticated than this or that. It's a very sophisticated, it's a very complicated process. And it goes on, by the way, it's almost unconscious. It's almost unconscious, right? Because you're living in that culture, you're not watching yourself do this, right? The ways in which we become Americans is unconscious to us. The only way to see the extent to which we have become American is to sit with somebody who's not an American, or sit from a perspective of history and look at our lifestyles and see how we have assimilated American forms All right? I'll just give you a little, just a tiny idea. Architecture. There's no such thing as Jewish architecture. And when Solomon wanted to build the temple, he got a guy named Hiram. His contractor was a guy named Hiram of Tyre. And they built the Holy Temple of Jerusalem like a Phoenician shrine. I mean, we've always gotten, we got the contractor from outside, right? And then when they built the second temple, then comes along Herod and decides to rebuild it. He builds it like a Roman shrine. Okay? And then all through history, if you look at synagogues, they look remarkably like the churches and the theaters and the public buildings of the cultures in which we live, including this one. If you walked into VBS and didn't know what it was, it looks a whole lot like a 1960s American movie theater. No, really, you have theater-style seats facing forward in a slanting thing, facing a stage. It either looks like a theater or it looks like a movie. And that's how they built it, because in 1966, when they hired Fried was the famous architect, to build VBS, that's what he built. Right? I mean, interestingly, by the way, the spiritual metaphor of our sanctuary is vertical. You won't see this as much as I see it, because come stand where I stand. I stand way above you, and you all are way down there. In fact, the seats actually tilt back a little bit. You ever notice that? So you can look up at me, because you're looking at me, and I am the conduit to what is beyond, which is God. You're down, I'm up. I know, you learning. I speak, you listen. I teach, you absorb. I command, you obey. Right? That was the spiritual metaphor of American Protestantism of the 1940s and 1950s. The great preachers, right? Norman Vincent Peale and Billy Graham and Oliver Schultz, and right? And his loony son, Now, what happened in the interim? What happened in the interim was a very interesting thing. We had a spiritual revolution in America. And now we do this. I don't feel comfortable standing above you. Right? In rabbi school, Hillel said, they taught us how to speak properly. Did you have, you had homiletics. Who was your homiletics teacher? Yeah, right. You're probably better than him anyway. Right? I went when I was a freshman at the seminary. I went across town to a very famous, I won't say this, I don't want to embarrass anybody, very famous synagogue. Actually, I can tell because he's dead. I went to Park Avenue Synagogue, and Judah Nadish was the rabbi. And they had a bar. One of my kids, I was a Hebrew school teacher, kid had a bar mitzvah. And the rabbi stood on the bima, and he said, please rise now, as we join the adoration of God on page 37. I said, man, what a voice. Wow. Right? Now we be seated, and we join together in prayer, as we bring God close. And I see, now I'm a Hebrew school teacher, and I see him, I'm walking the hall on Monday evening or Tuesday evening, and I see Rabbi Nadish. And I said, Rabbi Nadish, I'm at Feinstein, I'm a student at the seminary, I'm learning to be a rabbi, and I was so touched by your words on Shabbos. And he said, well, Sonny boy, why don't you come up to my office? We'll have a cup of coffee. It turned out that he happened to be this lovely, lovely man from Brooklyn, right? He was from Brooklyn, and he real lamdam. He really knew a lot. But when he got on the pulpit, it was important for him to speak like God speaks. But in person, he was this sweet, wonderful. So he wrote a book. He wrote a very, very good book. It was a collection of Jewish tales of the Second Commonwealth. And what did I tell you? So he reads. So we have I'm teaching one of the sections of the 7th grade, and they brought the 7th grade into the chapel. Look like this, and Nadish stands here, and he says to the children, "I have written a great book, and I hope that in the course of your life." And one of the kids raises his hand and says, "How did you write the book?" "Well, I did research in all of the great books." No. Did you use a pen or a pencil? And I'm thinking to myself, oh, shoot, he's going to eat that child. He's going to destroy him. And the most wonderful thing happened. Nadish stepped off the little bima and went back to and said, I use a pencil because I make a lot of mistakes when I write. Do you make a lot of mistakes when you write? Kid says, yeah. Says, and it's great to be able to erase. Don't you think that's a great thing to be able to erase? Because that way we don't have to be perfect. We can make mistakes and still come out. And suddenly the real man came out. And I said, boy, if he would speak to people in that voice, more people would follow him. But that was the generation. Remember the generation? You stood on the bima and you spoke like the Lord, right? I can do that, but it's not me. So what's happened in the intervening generation is that we've now moved to a horizontal spirituality. So that's why we're going to redecorate the shul next year. I mean, we're going to we're going to rebuild the synagogue in the round. And it'll be on, so we can talk to each other, because this is a different spirituality, because this is a different model. But architecture has always reflected the culture in which we live. Food reflects the cultures in which we live. Ideas reflect the culture. And this question of what is creative and what is destructive assimilation is one of the great questions of our culture. So if you look here, here's the beginning of the argument, right? While Israel was staying at Shittim, Shittim is just outside the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. So if you think about Israel, think of the Jordan River, which is on the east side, right? So they're on the east side of the Jordan. They're in today where the country of Jordan is. And they're going to cross the Jordan into the land. But this is occupied land. There are tribes out here, right? And they profane themselves by whoring, the word is at least note, with the Moabite women. That's not what happened. They began intermarrying. And we were camped out there, and there were neighbors. And you sent your kid to the local high school. So he fell in love with his lab partner, who happened to be a cute Moabite girl. So you said, okay, what the hell? Bring her into the family. And we began to intermarry with the people of the land, which the Bible interprets as an act of betrayal. But in fact, it's exactly the pattern, right? The people who invited the people to sacrifice to their God. Well, of course they did. That's only hospitable. If you invite a family to dinner, you offer a sacrifice to your God, right? Right? The people partook and worshiped that God. Israel attached themselves to Baal Peor. Baal is the male god of the Canaanite Middle Eastern pantheon. And the Lord was incensed. Yeah, because, you have the only God in the world who gets angry when you worship local gods. Polytheism is a wonderful multiculturalism. Wherever you are, you worship the local gods. It's only polite. When in Rome, daven like a Roman, You have the only God in the world who gets upset about this, right? So what happens? The Lord said to Moses, take all the ringleaders and have them publicly impaled. All right, God gets upset, okay? And now you get this idea that God has this very short fuse, right? Because God doesn't understand this, or at least the God of the Bible, or the God of this section of the Bible, is the voice of cultural purity. Torah, true Judaism. But what's ironic about that is that the character of that God was actually assimilated from desert gods that we learned about. In other words, there's nothing pure here. Everything has been touched by other cultures. Okay? Just then, page 908. Okay, this is rated X, so if you're under the age of 18, cover your ears. Just then, one of the Israelites came and brought a Midianite woman over to his companions. Midian is a tribe. Now, Midian is an interesting tribe. Midian is a nomadic tribe. Moses lived with them. Remember, his wife is Midianite. And the Midianites settle in certain places, but they're Bedouins. They're the nomads, right? And in the sight of Moses and the whole Israelite community who were weeping at the tent of the meeting. So they had to kill all these bad guys, and now there's this mourning going on, and this guy takes this woman. When Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, saw this, so this is Aaron's grandson, Pinchas, he left the assembly, taking a spear in his hand. Don't do this at home. He followed the Israelite into the chamber and stabbed both of them, the Israelite and the woman, through the belly. Okay? Then the plague against Israel was checked, and those who died were 24,000. Now quickly, turn the page. Turn 9:18. Today we start this story again. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the Israelites by displaying among them his passion for me. The word is kniut, right? Kina, which means zealotry, passion. You could also say, if you were on the other side of the moral divide, fanaticism, right? A religious terrorist, right? This is a guy who kills people for faith, right? So the Bible's God likes this. Well, we're not sure. Listen. By displaying this passion so that I did not wipe out the Israelites in my passion. The sense of God can't quite control his temper. Say, therefore, I grant him. Now here's the word. Brit shalom. It's translated here as pact of friendship. Brit shalom. Brit means covenant. Shalom means peace. So hold on to that idea a second. Vaitalo, and he shall be for him his descendants, a pact of priesthood for all time, because he took this impassioned action for God, thus making expiation for the Israelites. So the question I want to ask you is, did he do the right thing? Does the Bible think he did the right thing? Did the rabbis think he did the right thing? Is this an example you want to follow? The name of the Israelite who was killed, the one who was killed with the Midianite woman, was Zimri, son of Salu, chieftain of the tribe of Shimon. So who is he? He's the son of the tribal leader, the tribal elder. And ironically, it's the tribe of Shimon. Anybody know why that's ironic? Because they did the thing with Shechem. Remember Shechem? The rape of Dinah? Dinah gets taken, so it's Levi and Shimon. It's Levi and Shimon who go avenge her, and they destroy the town of Shechem. Levi and Shimon. Zimri, the guy who got it, was the descendant of Shimon, and Pinchas, the guy who killed him, is the descendant of Levi. We have a temper problem, an anger management problem here, right, in these two characters. And the name of the woman who was killed was Cosby, don't say anything, daughter of Tsur. He was the tribal head of Midian. Who's she? She's the princess. This wasn't an act of spontaneous sexual joy. What was this? This was a treaty. This was a diplomatic move, a treaty between the tribe of Shimon and the Midianites. And the reason why Pinchas killed them was because this treaty was entered into without the approval of Moshe, without the approval of the community. One tribe breaks off and decides to cut a separate piece with one of the local tribes and intermarry with that tribe. This is the confrontation of culture with culture. Now, let's go back to the act a minute. He kills them. Did he do the right thing? Does the Bible think he did the right thing? You could read it both ways. You could say he did the right thing. Why did he do the right thing, Ronnie? Why?
Because he obeyed God.
Because he protected the purity of the faith of the people and protected the people from God's anger. And God said, no gods before me. I mean, so he's protecting the religious purity of this community. Why would it be that he's not doing the right thing? Because there's no due process. Because there's no, let's think about how to deal with this. There's no conversation. He does it on his own, without consulting with anybody. There's something very frightening about people who decide to solve problems on their own with weapons, without communicating, without deliberating, without any kind of due process. Why do we have due process? So that people with guns don't go solve their own problems, you see? Because we all have an urge to go do it to somebody who hurt us. You remember the famous presidential debate with Michael Dukakis? Remember Michael Dukakis? Michael Dukakis was the governor of Massachusetts, and he was running for president against Bush. Bush won. And during one of the debates, Robinson, the guy from ABC, asked him, "You're against capital punishment?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "What if your wife were raped? If your wife were raped and we caught the rapist, wouldn't you want to kill him?" It's very interesting. And Dukakis humped and fumped there. The answer to the question is, of course I'd want to kill him. With my own hands around his throat. That's the reason why there's due process. To protect us from our own impulses. If the community determines that he did it, and the community determines that it's an evil of that level, the community will adjudicate and will destroy him. But not me. You don't let people go off and do this on their own. So the rabbis are very ambivalent about this. The Bible seems to celebrate it. Ron's right. But the rabbis, when they read this, said, And what's interesting is, what does he get as a reward? Two things. Look, what does it say? He gets a pact of priesthood and brit shalom. Now, brit shalom can mean, as the translator put it here, a pact of friendship. God loves him. Really? Maybe brit shalom means he needs to learn how to control his temper. He needs to learn shalom as a way of life, not a violence. And the priesthood, it's a really interesting job for a guy who kills things, right? What happens to him? The priesthood means that you don the clothing of the priest from head to toe, and you kill animals as the sacrificial worship, so you're sublimating the rage into objects that are legitimate and relatively harmless. You're not killing people. And the rabbis read it that way. That Pinchas had to become a priest because that's the only job in the community where he could vent his rage without hurting anybody. Yes, please.
I think that also coming right after this is when they don the clothes.
Yeah.
When they give him the actual accoutrements, which is this incredibly heavy.
Right.
Heavy. It's like the weight of the priesthood all of a sudden is on his shoulders.
Right.
And he's no longer able to act in that way.
He's no longer able to act. And more than that, you cover yourself from head to toe. He ceases to be an individual. He becomes totally the servant, the vessel of the community's needs. And his individual needs, even to the extent of burying family members, is not permitted. Right? Death now becomes something he has to stay the hell away from. It's a very interesting image. So the rabbis pick this up and say, the Bible may approve of this, but we don't. And here's why. It's that subtle idea that somehow you have to sublimate, that you can't let violence run through the streets of a community. Otherwise, there's no community. Violence has to be sublimated into due process. Right? Unless you live in Texas, you can't have people run around with guns. It becomes very dangerous, right? That's why you have police. You have people who are trained and presumably trained, hopefully trained, to control themselves as they control violence. That's the theory that's going on here. Yeah, Steve. Nice shirt. It's a great shirt. No, it's a great, I love it. You can always wear Hawaiian shirts in my shul.
Is it the Midrash or the Mishnah? Forgive me for getting them. You told us once. But it said that when Moses knew he couldn't go into the promised land, and he was trying to get a list of people to replace him.
Yeah.
What I heard one other time was that Pinchas' name came up.
Yeah.
And God said, not a chance.
Yeah.
Which is what he did.
Yeah, because you think that Brit Shalom, maybe he should be the one who replaces Moshe. But you can't have somebody who's that impulsive doing that, because you're going to lead people into war. You're going to give him the ultimate weapons. You're going to give him the
rabbis rereading
the
God.
army. Yeah, the army. Why is it in this parsha Joshua gets chosen, not Pinchas? Because Joshua has much more self-control.
What happened to Caleb? Why doesn't he get any glory?
I don't know.
You don't really?
I think you're right.
Well, in the book of Joshua, and then later, I think, and then
Caleb doesn't get.
Caleb becomes a character.
Yeah, but he doesn't get the press he deserves. He doesn't get the press he deserves, right? I was at the park the other day, and some mom was calling and said, "Caleb, come over here." And I said, "Oh my God, Caleb! Do you know what Caleb means?" I said, "No, you don't want to know." It's Caleb, Read my son, Spot,
There's no way to spin this that the biblical author doesn't think this is a good idea.
No. I think the biblical author loves this, because the God of this section loves this, because because the biblical author is terrified of the cultural interaction between Israel and the Canaanite peoples, Midianites, Moabites. He's so terrified because he's writing from a place where that became a very serious problem.
And so much so that he separates the killing from the reward because you have to wait a week
Yeah.
to find that out.
Well, hang on. So hold that thought, because I want to show you another character. So the rabbis make a really interesting move. You remember, every Torah portion has to have a haftorah. That is, every week we read a section of Torah, and the rabbis chose from the prophets, which is the next section of the Tanakh, a section that is parallel. And the section they chose for this week is all about Elijah, Eliyahu Hanavi. You'll find it on 938. Now, what is the connection between Elijah and Pinchas? Well, you'll see in a minute. Elijah is the spiritual, not the physical, the spiritual descendant of Pinchas. So let's get the story of Elijah down. There's two haftarahs which give us the two great moments in Elijah's life. This is number 2. We'll come back to this. So come with me now to page 548. These two sections are consecutive in the Bible, but they're split up because they're different haftarot. Page 548, please. Okay? All right, so we're going to advance our story now. We're going to fast forward. Moses brings the people into the land, to the land. Joshua brings them into the land. For 200 years, there is no central government. They're governed by tribal elders. That's what we call the period of the judges. In about the year 1000 BCE, a tribe of Greeks migrate from Phoenicia, from Attica to Phoenicia, and from Phoenicia down the coast, and they settle in the southwest quadrant of Canaan. They're called the Philistines. The Philistines are Greeks. They bring certain advantages, strategic advantages. There are 5 Philistine cities: Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, and Gat. Okay? They have a defense pack among these cities. So if one is attacked, the others come to its defense. The Greeks brought iron. The Israelites owned bronze. If you're wearing bronze armor and someone shoots you with an iron-tipped spear, you're dead. They brought chariots, which did to warfare what the tank did in the First World War. Right? It's believed, and I'm not an expert in this, that the section in Exodus that talks about Pharaoh's chariots is anachronistic. Chariots didn't come in until much later. So they bring these weapons, and suddenly the Philistines began expanding their territory into the territory of Israel. And the Israelites discovered that without a central government, they can't resist this. They can't push it back, this incursion into their territory. So they come to the prophet Samuel, who's the leading prophet at the time, and they say, "Give us a king." And Samuel resists this, but eventually he gives in, and he appoints Saul as king. And first Saul is successful, and then Saul is unsuccessful in repelling the Philistine invasion. And then finally, they appoint David. There's a young warrior in Saul's administration who actually lived with the Philistines for a while and stole the secret of iron smelting and becomes king of Israel and repels the invasion of the Philistines and builds a kingdom with its capital in Jerusalem. That's King David. David dies, and his son Solomon takes over and further expands the kingdom. When Solomon dies, the kingdom splits. There's a revolt of the north against the south. The north is capitaled in Ephraim and Samaria. The south is capitaled in Jerusalem. Yes, once upon a time there were 2 Jewish countries, the one I lived in and the one I wouldn't be caught dead in. Right? What, those Jews? Are you kidding? And those 2 kingdoms were sort of rivals with each other. The southern kingdom, Judea, because it was mostly the tribe of Judah, was a sort of backwater. It wasn't a very wealthy place. But it was governed by a stable line of kings that were all the descendants of King David. The northern kingdom became a very powerful place. It was a caravan stop and a trading center. And the city of Samaria became very prosperous. Very prosperous. But it had a very unstable government. In the 8th century, the king is deposed by his general, a guy named Omri. Omri consolidates his power and turns the kingdom over to his son, whose name is Ahab. He'd been reading Moby Dick, and he named it for it. And anyway, so Ahab becomes king of Israel, and Ahab consolidates power completely. And the way you consolidated power was by marrying the daughters of all the local kings. So he marries the daughters of all the local kings, and they bring their gods and their goddesses and their worship into Samaria, into the capital of the northern kingdom. And now you have a very prosperous kingdom that has all this God worship all over the place. And the principal consort, the principal queen of the northern kingdom was a woman named Jezebel. That probably wasn't her name. Because Jezebel in Hebrew is He-Zevel, which means she's trash. And somehow I don't think that's what her husband called her. Maybe they were a little kinky, I don't know. But she probably had a throne name. But that's what she's called in the Bible. It's a very funny, it's a very funny kind of insult. And you have a kingdom here which abandons the way of God and becomes a center for this worship of all these local gods, which was as much diplomatic as it was religious. And in the midst of this, you have the first great classical prophet, whose name is Elijah. Elijah is sent, it says, to go and speak against Ahab. The first story has to do with a drought, a terrible drought. And in the midst of this terrible drought, Ahab is hunting for this Elijah. And if you'll look with me, page 549. Obadiah, he's the chief of staff of the king, Ahab, went out to find Ahab and informed him where he can find Elijah. And Ahab went out to Elijah. The king meets the prophet. And when Elijah caught sight of Ahab, Ahab said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" He retorted, "It's not I who have brought trouble on Israel, but you and your father's house, by forsaking the commandments of the Lord and going after the Baalim, by leading Israel into idolatry." So you see the same theme of living among other peoples and adopting their worship, their God worship, their values, right? "Now summon all of Israel to join me on Mount Carmel." This is Elijah speaking to Ahab. "Together with 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." Jezebel brought in all of this worship. So Elijah says, let's put an end to this. Let's have a contest. The Super Bowl of idolatry. Once and for all, we'll see whose God is God. We'll do it all at once. Because Elijah doesn't know, how do you convince a people to worship an invisible God when all around them are these statues and images and this very visceral worship of all of these local fertility gods? How do you get people to worship a God of morality when you can have idols who will give you anything you want? I mean, what is idolatry? Idolatry isn't worshiping a statue or a tree or a rock. Idolatry is the worship of my ego. I want the God to do what I want the God to do. Make God do it. Remember last week, Balak, remember? The Bilam, the wizard. Make God do what I want God to do. And if God doesn't do what I want God to do, I'll go shop it around and find a God who will do it for a lower price. It's a worship of the ego. It's a way of manipulating God. So what does Elijah say? If that's what you think, I'll show you what. And he calls them, and this is this great image, this wonderful story. You know this story? It's a great story. Ahab sent orders to the Israelites, and they gathered at Mount Carmel. Where's Mount Carmel? Anybody know? Haifa. You know where Haifa is? In the north of Israel. Beautiful place, overlooking the bay. Nice. Elijah approached all the people and said, "How long will you keep hopping?" The word is poschim, from the word Pesach. Skipping, hopping. How long will you hop between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. And if Baal, follow him. So what is he objecting to? He's not even really objecting to the idolatry. What is he objecting to? Sort of the opportunistic worship of gods, right? If I want rain, I worship this God. And if I want sunshine, I worship this God. You know, if the Dodgers are winning, I'm a Dodger fan. If the Giants are winning, I'm a Giants fan. I know people like this, right? There's no loyalty. There's no sense of attachment because there's no sense that the God is actually bigger than me. God is there to serve me. This is a God made over in my own image. And that's what Elijah's objecting to. So what does he say? But the people answered him not a word, like they're quiet. So he says, I'm only one prophet of the Lord left. Jezebel wiped out all of the believers. While the prophets of Baal are 450 men. Let 2 young bulls be given us. Let them choose one bull, cut it up, lay it onto wood, but don't apply fire. I'll prepare the other bull and lay it onto wood and will not apply fire. You make them invoke your God by name. I'll invoke the Lord by name. And let us agree, the God who responds with fire, that God is God. Anyone remember the movie Oh God, with George Burns as the Lord? And they bring him to court, and the prosecutor says, who are you? And he says, I'm God. He says, prove it. Okay, pulls out a deck of cards, says, pick a card, any card, right? like, what do you want? So, but this is what Elijah's doing, right? Elijah's doing this. He says, if this is what they want, I'll show them. This is theological theatrics, right? So Elijah says, choose the bull. You prepare, you choose yours first, right? Gives them all the advantages. Prepare it first, you are the majority, invoke your God by name, apply no fire. They took the bull that was given, they prepared it, they invoked Baal by name from morning to noon, shouting, oh Baal, answer us. But there was no sound, none who responded, to perform the hopping dance, ecstatic dancing around the altar. And when noon came, you see the Bible making fun of idolatry here, right? Elijah mocked them, saying, shout louder, after all, he's a God, but he may be in conversation, he's on the phone. He may be detained. He's at an appointment. He's eating lunch. Maybe he's on a journey. Perhaps he's asleep and he'll wake up. So they shouted louder and they gashed themselves with knives. No. This self-flagellation is part of many religious rituals, right? Yeah. This is, by the way, where the biblical prohibition against tattoos comes from. Because this was part of idolatrous worship, right? To gash yourself with knives, right? Spears, according to practice, the blood streamed all over. When noon passed, they kept raving until the hour of presenting the grain offering, till 3 p.m. Still there was no sound. All right, then Elijah says, okay, boys, watch this. I mean, this is such good, someone's got to film this. This is great television. Then Elijah said to people, this is Game of Thrones, right? Come closer to me. And the people came closer. He repaired the damaged altar of the Lord. He took 12 stones, corresponding to 12 tribes, right? And with the stones he built an altar, and around the altar he made a trench. And he laid out the wood, and he cut the bull, and he laid it on the wood. And he said to them, okay, watch this. This is like Harry Houdini, right? Fill 4 jars with water and pour it over the wood. And they did it. Do it a second time. Do it a third time. Right? The water ran down the altar and even filled up the trench when it was time to present the grain offering. That's 3 p.m. The prophet came forward and he said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant, and I have done all these things at your bidding. Answer me, O Lord, answer me. Aneni, right? Aneni. It's part of our prayers, right? That this people may know that you are God, that you, O Lord, are God. You've turned their hearts backwards. Then, I love this, the fire from the Lord descended and consumed the burnt offering. The wood, the stones, the earth licked up the water was in a trench. And when they saw this, the people flung themselves on their faces and cried out, Adonai hu ha-Elohim, Adonai hu ha-Elohim. When do we say that? At the end of Yom Kippur. Think about that for a second. At the end of Yom Kippur, who are we? The idolatrous people of Israel who finally see with their own eyes that God is God, right? Did it work? Did it work? Was he that should do it? I mean, God, he just won the Super Bowl. Take me to Disneyland. Elijah, you've just defeated the gods of God. Where are you going now? I'm going to Disneyland. Why doesn't it work? What did he just accomplish? A magic trick. A really good one, by the way. I mean, with the jars of water and everything. Why doesn't it work? What's wrong with this? What's missing? What's missing? Come on. What's missing here?
Meaning.
Why doesn't it work? Why doesn't it work? Yeah, come on.
You're missing anything related to a God of morality. You're missing, it's all just smoke and mirrors.
Because he turned God into a bigger idol. Right? God's just a bigger idol. You make fire, fire. All right, great. Make water. It's just another idol. If that's all you're looking for is an idol, a God who will do what you need done in the world. And so the poor man goes into a deep depression because he doesn't know how to reach his people. He just doesn't know how to reach his people. So now turn to this week's Haftorah, page 938. We good so far? Here's the second great narrative of Elijah. which is this week's Haftorah. This is the Haftorah, right? When Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, so what happens at the end of the story, they kill all the prophets of Baal. Ahab comes home and says to Jezebel, I had a really bad day at the office today. Jezebel sent messengers to Elijah saying, thus and more may the gods do if by tomorrow I have not made you like one of them. Jezebel puts a contract out on Elijah's life. Frightened, he fled at once for his life. So he's in Samaria, which is in the north today, near Shechem. He flees southward to Beersheba, which is in Judah, and left his servant there. He went a day's journey into the wilderness. Anyone ever been to Beersheba? Ever been to Beersheba? What's just outside of Beersheba? That's the right answer. Nothing. It's an empty, dry, arid, ugly desert. It's not a pretty desert. It's an ugly desert. It's just ugh, nothing. There's nothing there, right? He came upon a broom bush and sat down. There's no shade. He just finds this sort of tumbleweed. And the man is broken. Why is he broken? Because his whole life, what has he wanted to do? To bring his people back to the worship of the God of his ancestors. And he thought he knew how to do it. But he discovered that he managed to do exactly the opposite. He turned his God into an idol. He turned his God into an idol because he offered them, our God can do bigger magic than your God. But that doesn't change the mind of this people. Does this sound familiar to anybody? What does this sound like? It's Moses. It's good. What are we going to say?
Yeah, Moses with the snake, his staff becomes a bigger way.
It's Moses' frustration through his whole life. Remember Moses' problem at the bush? Where bushes play a big deal in our, not political, but those. Because Moses' problem was, what if I come and they tell them, I tell them I'm coming in your name and they don't believe me? So what does God give him? Magic tricks. But Moses realized that's not what they don't want that. That's not monotheism. Magic tricks are not monotheism. Because magic tricks just turn God into another idol. A God who will do what you want him to do. That's not monotheism. Elijah has the same problem Moses does. And the fact that this is the Haftorah at this point in the Torah is just brilliant, because the question is, Moses is told in this Torah portion once again, you're not going into the land. You're going to die in the wilderness. And the question we're going to begin, and he points to successor. Did Moses succeed or fail? Is Moses' life a celebration of success, or is Moses a gargantuan failure? Let me ask you the bigger question. Is the Jewish project successful or failure? Is the Jewish project successful? I mean, you understand what's being asked here? It's a very sophisticated question here. Can you ever bring a people to worship God truly? Or are people always going to think of God as just a bigger idol? And that's going to be the question. Bobby, go ahead.
We're here. It succeeded.
Well, okay, we're here, it succeeded, but...
In a very simplistic answer.
Yeah.
We're, through many things, we're still here.
Yes.
And we're continuing to address the question.
Yeah, that's great.
That's it.
But does it give you pause that we're still fighting the same damn question about what are the cultural boundaries and what comes in and what goes out, and we're still worried about tomorrow? There was a great historian at Brandeis University named Simon Ravidovich, and he wrote a famous essay called "The Ever-Dying People," and he said every generation of Jews always worries that it's the last. The essay begins with a beautiful sentence. It says, the world has many images of the Jewish people, but we have only one image of ourselves. We're always in trouble. We're always in trouble. And he contrasts this, and he shows that in biblical times, in medieval times, in early modern times, you read essays and people are like, oh my God, my kids are not lighting Shabbos candles. Right? My kids are assimilating. This is like the ever-dying people. And he says at the end of the essay, chill. He agrees with you. He says, an ever-dying people is an ever-renewing people. But it's a very interesting point of view. So here you have Elijah, and he says, I'm the last faithful Jew in the world. He's the last Jedi. living alone on an asteroid somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, right? With his lightsaber. If you don't understand those metaphors, don't worry. Okay? I told you, assimilation's part of us, right? Right? I mean, here he is, Luke Skywalker, Luke meaning light, right? Here is Elijah the prophet, living out in the middle of nowhere, and he's on the desert under a broom bush complaining to God, I'm the last faithful one left. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with us? Can this battle ever be won? Now, just before you answer it, look again, right? And he says he comes to a bridge, he sat down and he prayed and he might die. You've heard of death by cop? This is death by prayer. He says, enough! O Lord, take my life, for I'm no better than my fathers. Kill me, I'm an abject failure. You sent me to bring your people back to true worship. I failed. I made it worse. I turned you into an idol.
Why is it I failed? You sent me.
No, I know, but he thinks of himself, he is the embodiment of faith, and he wants to bring his people back to faith, and he just feels like, I can't do it. Anyone ever failed at something, like really screwed up at your life's project, right? And you say, kill me now, you know? And then I'll show you that God is Jewish. Watch. He lay down and fell asleep, and suddenly an angel touched him and said, sit up and eat something. God is a Jewish mother. I know you're upset. Have a meal, you'll feel better. No, seriously, that's what it says. Like the man is going through this horrible existential crisis, the long night of his soul, and the first thing the angel says is, okay, fine, but have a sandwich and a soup. So he looked about, and there beside his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and he drank and he lay down again. Right? And the angel said again, arise and eat, or the journey will be too much. So he arose and he ate and he drank, and with the strength from that meal he walked, listen to the number, 40 days and 40 nights. 40 days and 40 nights, as far as the mountain of God at Horeb. Where did he go? Sinai. Back to Sinai. Why is he going back to Sinai? Because that's where it all began. That's where the struggle began. Because Elijah is the second Moses. But this Moses feels he's failed. Right? God gave them the land. God gave them blessing. And instead they worship the people, the land, the idols of the land. He feels he's carried on Moshe's task, but he's failed. So he goes back to the beginning to see what can he do. It's a profound statement. Look at the next one. I just love this story. Then the word of the Lord came to him, and he said, this is great. Why are you here, Elijah? What an interesting thing to ask, right? Right? Vahine, the Hebrew is very good. Vahine. Hineni. Here, look. Davar Adonai Elav. Now, it doesn't say what you think is good. It doesn't say Vayidaber Adonai Elav. It doesn't say God spoke to him, or Vayomer Adonai Elav. It says, Davar Adonai Elav. The word of God got to him. It's very subtle. Vayomer, and it said Vayomer lo. Listen carefully. Ma lecha po Eliyahu. Ma lecha po Eliyahu. Ma lecha. What are you doing here? What business? Ma lecha, what are you doing here? Where's here? What are you doing on Mount Sinai? It's more than that. What are you doing in life? Right? Remember, what was the first question that God asked Adam in the Garden of Eden? Ayeka, where are you? Here he asks another question. Questions are what the story is all about, folks. And you find a question in the Bible, underline it. It's what the whole narrative's about. God comes to him, but it's like the word of God comes to him, not God's voice. And God says to him, Nu, why are you alive? What are you here for? Do you have a mission? What's your intention? What's your purpose? What's your purpose? Vayomer kano kaniti ladonai. Kano kaniti ladonai is the same language as with Pinchas. I am zealous, I am jealous, I am passionate, I am consumed with love of God. I am consumed with the task of bringing my people to God. I am consumed with this. This is what I am. This is me. Right? Kano kaniti ladonai Elohei tzvaot ki azvu britecha b'nei Yisrael. But your people have abandoned their covenant. Your people have abandoned your covenant. By the way, because of that line, there's a midrash on that line that says, because he said that, God says to him, that's an insult to my people, and therefore you are going to have to visit every place where people renews the covenant. So when does Elijah show up? Pesach, when we renew the covenant. Pesach is a covenant renewal. When else does he come back? Bris. Zeh kisei shel Eliyahu zachur latov. Right? This is the chair of Elijah. Every time we renew the covenant, Eliyahu Navi shows up. Elijah shows up. Because it's his punishment for saying that we abandoned the covenant. Or better yet, it's not his punishment. It's his nechemta. It's his reward. It's his comfort. They haven't abandoned my covenant. Look, they still circumcise. They still make Pesach. It's a very interesting idea. I am moved for zeal, Lord. The Israelites who have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, put your prophets to the sword. I alone am left. I'm the last Jedi. And they are out to take my life. And they're out to kill me. They're out to kill me. And he called and said, stand on the mountain before the Lord. So everybody get Elijah's problem now? Now listen to God's answer. Listen to God. It's such an interesting answer. What do you think God, before you read it, what should God tell him? What should God do for him? Give him a stick that turns into a snake, Smack him alongside the head. Give him, but it's much like Moses, right? It's Moses saying, I can't go to Pharaoh because they won't believe me. He wasn't worried about Pharaoh. What was he worried about? He was worried about the people won't believe me. How can I bring them to you? This is the great question. How do I bring them to you? I've run out of magic tricks. I did that incredible thing on Mount Carmel. It didn't work. What else can I do? What else can I do? And then God says to him, you got it all wrong. This is great. Right? Vihine. This paragraph begins with the same word. Vihine. And so. Which gives you the sense that this might have been a drama. It's certainly a storytelling. Vihine. That's how you tell a story, right? And so, Vihine. Adonai over, God passed by. Right? V'ruach gedolah v'chazak mifarek harim. A great wind splitting mountains and shattering rocks by the power of the Lord. But God was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire, but God was not in the fire. What do you mean? What do you mean? I want miracles. I want a bigger trick. I did the thing with the fire and it didn't work. Give me something bigger. So God says, watch this. And he produces a tornado. It smashes a mountain. But God's not in the tornado. And then there's an earthquake. God's not in the earthquake. Then a burning fire and God's not there. What do you mean God's not there? What does that mean God's not there? No magic trick is ever going to teach people faith. It don't work. I got news. We rabbis know this. Right? We rabbis know this. People come and say all the time, say a prayer for my loved one. Right? And if your loved one gets better, you're going to become faithful. Right? Maybe to the doctor, What magic trick turns the heart? That's not how it works, says God. Listen to the next line. This is beautiful, right? Ve'achar number 12. Ve'achar harash, after the earthquake, eish velo be'eish Adonai. Ve'achar ha'eish kol damama daka. 3 words. Kol damama daka. Kol means the sound of or the voice of. Damama means silence. Daka means delicate or exquisite. The sound of exquisite silence. Yeah, it could be daka, it could be momentary, but I think it's daka like dak. Mazid dak, it's fine, thin, exquisite. The sound of exquisite silence. Yeah, the sound of, it could be like that. It could be a Buddhist koan. It could be like, you got to let go of this kid. You're looking in the wrong place. But think deeply. What does he mean? God wasn't in the fire, wasn't in the earthquake, wasn't in the wind. None of that stuff. Where is God? Kol d'mamadaka. In the sounds of silence. In the deep, delicate, exquisite sound of silence. Where do you find God? Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's there too. That's where they got it. Where do you find God? Where do you find God? Within. You got to find it. I think this. Maybe it's because I'm Schulweiss's student, but you find it within. Everything else is a magic trick. That's not faith, right? That's like, if you just transpose it for a moment to human relationships. It's the boy who comes to me and says, I'm in love with this girl, I want to marry her. And I say, why do you want to marry her? Why do you think you're in love? And he says, because she does everything for me that I want someone to do. No, he meant it. And he meant it. She's checked every box. She's everything I want in a girl. She does everything I need. And I said, you're not in love. You're worshiping yourself. You're in love with yourself. You're in love with yourself. And he said, what do you mean? I said, because you're not in love until the task is not that she does everything for you. It's when you tell me that your whole life is about doing for her. Then you're in love. Right? If your God is only a vending machine that gives you everything you want, all these big miracles for you, no, it's what it is. It's cosmic room service. It's cosmic room service. Bring me what I want.
Is the food hot?
That's exactly right. And I don't have to tip too much. That's cosmic room service. That's idolatry. Love is when I want to do for the other, not for myself. And faith is when I ask God to come into my heart, I find God in my heart, and I attach myself to God's purposes in the world. So what happens now is brilliant. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his mantle around his face and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Now, interestingly, he didn't wrap the mantle when he saw the wind. You'd think that when there's a tornado, you'd wrap your cloak around your face. And in the fire, you'd think you'd protect yourself from the fire. And you'd think you'd protect yourself from the earthquake, but that wasn't it. It was when that moment of silence came, that's when he broke. And he wraps himself in his cloak. That's when you wrap yourself in a tallis when you daven. You see people wrap themselves in a tallis when you daven? That's where it comes from. Called mamadaka, right? And he went out and stood. And then the second time, God says, Malacha po Eliyahu. Why are you in the world, Boychik? Why are you in the world? And now he gets it. Now the same statement is repeated as before, but it's not a kvetch. It's not a complaint. It's not a moment of desperation. It's a renewed sense of commitment, right? I am moved by zeal for the Lord, the God of hosts, for Israel has forsaken your covenants, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to the sword. I alone am left, and they want to take my life. And God says, all right, Boychik, you're ready now. Go back. Go back. Because now he gets it. Now he understands what he has to teach. This is a wonderful image, a wonderful teaching about what it means to find faith, what it means to find God. Yes, please.
I have a question about the text.
Good.
Verse 11.
Yeah.
He commands him to get out of the cave and to stand
Yeah.
on the mountain.
Yeah.
On the mountain. And then after
Yeah. Then it says he came out.
the tornado and the fire, then it says that he comes out of the cave.
Yeah.
Where is
That's a wonderful. Where is he? Where is he? I don't know. That's a wonderful observation. If you want to be poetic, you can say he went out, but his heart wasn't in it. If you want to be more realistic, you can say he comes out and then the tornado comes, so he runs back in. And he comes out and the fire comes, he runs back in. And he comes, right? But the important part is, Malacha po Eliyahu, which is what God asks every one of us. What are you doing in the world? What are you doing in the world? You want magic tricks? Is that what's going to give you a sense of courage? Is that going to give you a sense of faith? That's not going to work. Ultimately, it's what you find in Kol D'mamad Dakah, the moment of silence within. You discover why you're in the world. And that is a source of courage that no magic trick's ever going to be able to give you. Sherry, please.
So what, the difference, the words are the same in 10 and 14. What do you see in 14 that makes it?
Tell me. You have, this is a literary trick, Sher. It's a literary device. You have vignette A, right? You have event B, and then you have event A prime. How is Elijah different if the words are exactly the same? And it's all in how you choose to read it. It's all in how you choose to. Is he really the same at the end that he was at the beginning, or did this event change him? I think this event changed him. I think he was suicidal, depressed, despondent, despairing at the beginning, and somehow this event brought him to confront his truth.
It's the mantle, that's the shift that happened.
It's the mantle, and it's the silence. He found something in that silence that he never found in the magic tricks. You see, that's how I read it, and I think that the brilliance of the text is to use exactly the same words. But you can say the same words with two very different tones of voice. When he does it the first time, he's whining. He's whining. I wanted to help God. I wanted to be God, and no one will listen to me. And I'm a failure, and I couldn't get it done, and I'm desperate, and I'm alone, and I give up. Kill me here. And at the end, he says, I now know what my mission is. Send me. I think that it's the man gains courage. And the question is, look, it's not him, it's us. How do you gain courage? If you believe in something that is important in the world and you're up against big odds, this is a great literary theme, right? The hero always wins at the end of the movie, right? But the question is, what's the moment of truth? How does a hero, how does anybody find their truth in the world and gain the courage to stand for that which matters to them? And God says, don't look for magic tricks. Kol dmama daka. I think it's a wonderful meditation about truth, about finding truth, right? Because we all want to go to Mount Sinai, and what do we want happen on Mount Sinai? We want God to come again and shake them. All those things, by the way, are things that happened the first time we came to Mount Sinai, right? There was fire, there was earthquake, there was noise, there was wind. That's how God gave us the Ten Commandments, remember? This time, he has the same special effects, but that's not where it's at, folks, because God learned something. That's not how you change people's lives. That's not how you change people's lives. You change them in those moments of silence. I mean, it's a profound text. And it's here because we're almost at the end of, next week we're going to finish the book of Bamidbar. Moses' life is coming to an end. Our journey's coming to an end. So it's sort of like, before I send you into the promised land, I want you to hear truth. It's a beautiful ending to the book of Bamidbar. Who do we got? A bunch of people here. Farzan, hi. I met your daughter this week, and your new son-in-law. Mazel tov, Mubarak. He's a dentist, a Jewish doctor. Mention Rabbi Feinstein's Torah study, and you'll get a free crown, you know. Congratulations. Many, many blessings for your children. Many, many blessings.
So I think magic is part of our psyche. We all get
Yes,
excited about it.
you're exactly right.
I mean,
That was last week's lecture. Right.
so
You're exactly right.
the way I read the story, I can read it on two different points of view. One, as a spiritual leader of the collective that belongs to many different levels of faith and spirituality.
Yeah.
For the one at the bottom, maybe magic is the only language that speaks to them.
But you see, I think you're exactly right. And we talked about this at length last week, because with Bilam, it's all about, I think magic is part of human beings. The Bible, however, believes that it's a very childish kind of religious life. First of all, it's unrealistic, because we know that magic is an illusion, right? But we want to believe it. And when you want to believe something and you make it real, it's called magical thinking. That's what kids do, right? Kids play this game. It's a childish thing, right? And and the reason why it's dangerous for adults is because when we assimilate it into ourselves, we lose faith in ourselves. Magic is what I resort to when I don't have faith in my own agency. When I don't have faith in my own agency to create the conditions of my own existence that will give me a chance to achieve my dreams. So I take the pill which promises to lose weight while you sleep, while you eat waffles and fudge. That's trivial. I vote for a candidate who promised me everything that I want, even though any reasonable person can see they're all incongruent and contradictory, and that person has no idea how to achieve any of that. So I put my faith in somebody who tells me that he will solve all my problems. All I have to do is follow him and give up myself to him. It's slavery. Magic is the domain of Pharaoh, right? It's slavery. Because if you need that person to do for you, it means you're not doing for yourself. And our whole faith is about running away from Pharaoh, gaining the ability to take agency for your own life. If you take agency for your own life, you're going to fail all the time. But you're going to fail with dignity, because you'll have tried to create the conditions of your dreams, you see? And that really is the great contest. That's the great contest. And if you make God into your your magic wand, which is what this is about, right? You're just producing another form of idolatry, because it's, what I want, as opposed to the still small voice, which is look inside. Look inside. There's something there. That's where God lives, right? Not in wind and fire and earthquakes, but in you, in your power to do a mitzvah. You see? Now again, I grant you that this is my Schulweisian reading of the text. And if you ask your Orthodox friends, they'll read it differently, right? And that's just fine. But I think that's really what it says. Please.
I want to ask you about the side comment you made a moment ago about God learned something.
Yeah, I think so.
Approach.
Yeah.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Okay, good.
So here's the question. When you're teaching your 5-year-old and you're teaching your 15-year-old and you're teaching your 25-year-old,
Yeah.
you approach it in different ways.
Yes.
Is it that God simply adapted to where we were or the people were at that moment?
That's a great question. So it's a many-layered question, right? Maimonides, who's the great medieval rabbi, has this idea that God teaches us on the level that we need to learn, right? So he sees in the text a developmental sort of hierarchy, right? A developmental hierarchy that God will teach. When we're childlike, he teaches us like we're children. And as we grow, our religion grows with us. That's sort of Maimonides' idea, okay? Maimonides is dealing with the question of why sacrifices? What a crude and gross and ugly way to worship an infinite, abstract God, right? And he says, simple. Everybody else sacrificed. That's what people were expecting. If God had told people in the Bible, no sacrifices, I want you simply to meditate for an hour, no one would have believed him. So the idea that you're taught on the level that you're ready to be taught, you have exactly right. You teach your 5-year-old differently than you teach your 15, you teach your 25-year-old. Now, when I talk to parents, I tell them, you don't tell your kid lies. That's a terrible mistake, because then the kid will learn not to believe you. You just don't have to tell them the whole truth. No, it's very important. If a grandmother dies in a hospital, you don't have to tell the kid the whole diagnosis of cancer. You just say grandma was very old and her body stopped working and the doctors worked really, really, really hard to make her better, but they couldn't because her body wasn't working right. And the medicine didn't work and she died. And we miss her terribly. Now that's not untrue, but it's not the whole truth. Right? It's not the whole truth. And the 15-year-old can understand what cancer does to a body. And a 25-year-old can understand. I mean, so as we grow older, you can know more truth, but you don't lie to a kid. The same thing here. There's not a lie here. It's just, you're ready to hear a different truth. And it's not that God grows, it's that the community's reflection on God grows. Maimonides had this great idea. He said, first we sacrificed, then when the temple was destroyed, we prayed. And one day we'll put away prayer, because we don't need a prayer book. You just need kol d'mamat dakah. You need an hour of meditation. Meditation, he thought, was the highest form of worship, because it dispenses with all this external stuff. So we're sort of in an intermediate stage. Davening is the intermediate stage. And I go into shul and I see people sitting there quietly for hours on end with their eyes closed, and I know that they're deeply meditating on the Lord. That's why I never disturb them. Right? I never disturb them, because it is a deep state of spiritual attachment to the Lord. And I have been known to do the same myself on occasion. It's really scary when you wake up in the middle of your own sermon. And furthermore, what the hell am I talking about? It's a really frightening place to be. It's okay if you sleep, but if I'm asleep, then we're both in trouble.
Don't we believe
No.
Who hasn't said thank God?
All right.
Something like that, and we appreciate it, I understand.
And who hasn't said, dear God, I'm late for my appointment, I need a parking space? Everybody. Who hasn't said, there's a red light in my rearview mirror, please God, make it an ambulance, you know? Who hasn't said that? Right? You know, make it a broken taillight. But who hasn't said that? But of course, because that's an immediate kind of thing. That's your lowest self. But on a higher reflection, you know that's not how it works. Because if that's how it works, then you become a slave to that, you know? You know, that's the Mishigas when the guy, I know what that is. There's Mishigas in the Jewish world. You know that. And people pray on, and because ultimately it is an expression of fear. I'm afraid. Superstition is an expression of fear. It's fear. And I'm trying to conquer instead of looking within, to find the courage to meet the things I'm afraid of. Fear is natural. It's what you do next that's the choice. Because if you resort to superstition, then the fear stays there. But if you confront the fear and you say, I'm bigger than this, I'm better than this, that's faith. Faith is confronting the fear and overcoming it. Right? Superstition is living with the fear all the time, right? Black cats and cracks in the sidewalk and Numbers 13 and it's a slavery. That's what the Bible was worried about. Pop, you had your hand up.
Well, Rabbi Hartman gave us permission.
Yeah.
He was lecturing here.
Yes.
And Shulweiss was sitting in the audience.
Oh.
He gave us permission to believe in that old man in his sky.
Yeah.
And to ask him for help.
Yeah.
But from the time you ask for help and the time it actually happens, it gives you a little bit of hope. And it's like taking aspirin. It lessens the pain.
All right, so my dad says, Rabbi Hartman, David Hartman, said it's okay to believe in that God and to ask for help because in the gap you get a little bit of hope and it lessens the pain. Here's what Shulweiss would have answered and probably did in private. But if it doesn't come out the way you asked for it, then you say to God, what did I do wrong that you didn't...
You're ready to accept Shulweiss's ideology.
I know.
And it doesn't happen.
I know, but that's the problem. Shulweiss's ideology was developed because the answer, and every rabbi knows this, people will say, why did God say no? Why didn't God give me what I asked for? Right? No, you don't accept it. It's the famous Dear Abby. It's Dear Abby, last night I walked in on my little daughter who was praying and she asked God for a pony for Christmas. We live in an apartment in Detroit. A pony's not in my kid's future. What should I say? I don't want my kid to lose faith in God. And Dear Abby writes back and says, Dear, depressed in Detroit, tell your daughter that God hears all of our prayers, but sometimes God says no. Sounds reasonable, right? Except for this, says Shulweiss. This is Shulweiss. What happens with years from now, mommy's dying of cancer, and Susie prays to God, and mommy dies? Will you say, God said no? Because then Susie's going to either say, well, damn that God who could have cured my mother and didn't, or damn me because there's something flawed in me or mommy that we were punished with this cancer. You see, the world that gives you the opportunity that God could have cured it and didn't is a world you don't want to live in. And Shulweiss said, that's dangerous. That's bad religion. That's dangerous religion. Better to say, pray to God that mommy has the inner strength to take the medicine, that the physicians bring her the right cures, that the nurses bring compassion, that the community surrounds her. Pray to God that angels come in the person of friends and relatives and healers to help your mother. That is a prayer God will answer. Because if you imply that somehow God could have gotten rid of the cancer and didn't, that's a very difficult thing to believe when it doesn't happen. Then you end up with a very, very a moral problem. That's what Harold's whole career was about, that moral problem of why does God let bad things happen? You see the difference? But that's the same issue of magic. Don't ascribe it to magic. Still small voice. Have a very good week, everyone. Take care. Be really careful outside. It is blazing hot. Drink water, wear a hat, sit in shul all day. I have great air conditioning. Yeah, coming back on the 21st.